Okay folks, we're going to try something different, and I'm going to do you a video about the quadratic formula, really important formula that you will use lots and lots. So here are four main things we're going to cover. So you need to know when you'll actually use it, how to rearrange it, then how to solve a quadratic equation using the formula, and finally how do we involve surds with the quadratic formula. So why would we need the quadratic formula anyway? So here's a problem for you to solve. So I want you to solve this and hit pause, okay, and then come back and check your solution with my answer, okay? Okay, so hopefully by now you have solved this, and you should have been thinking about factorising. So I have factorised it into that. Now remember, with your factorising, front times front gives you the front, back times back gives you the back. So I thought about 18, and I thought about my factors. And I could have used 2 and 9 to make 18, but that's never going to make 3. So 3 and 6. Now notice the middle part, the middle term, is negative, which means if you make your biggest number here negative, it automatically creates this negative minus 3. This is a negative, so these signs needed to be different. So now we're saying this bracket times this bracket is nothing, therefore this bracket needs to equal 0, or this bracket needs to be equal to 0. Well, if this is equal to 0, then x is going to be minus 3, and if this is equal to 0, x is going to be 6. Okay, so that's solving a quadratic equation just by factorising, which is how we would always solve it first of all. So always try to factorise and solve. But what happens if I give you something like this? Now how do I solve this? Does this factorise? Because this is always the fastest, so front times front gives me the front. Now back times back gives me the back, but this has got to be a negative. This has got to be a negative minus 1, so these signs have to be different. Well, if I expand this, does it get me back to this? So I'm always going to check. So back times back gives me the back. Now look at the middle bits, you're going to get a plus 1x, and then a minus 1x, which cancels out, which gives you this, which is not. No, which is not this. So this is rubbish. Blech. So this will not factorise. You can't solve it by factorising it, but it can be solved. And this is where our quadratic formula comes into play. Okay? So first of all, quadratic equations. I've used the term, but let's just explain it. So a quadratic equation is always an x squared with some other stuff. Okay? So as long as as soon as I see an x squared, I know it's a quadratic. Sometimes it might not have an x, or a c. But generally it does. So A, B and C, these are just values. Typically integers, but they don't have to be. They might not be whole numbers, they're just numbers, okay? And we're always going to be wanting to solve a quadratic equation by setting it equal to 0. So if it doesn't equal 0, you've got to make it equal to 0. So which of these are quadratic? So we're going to play a little game show. I'm going to uncover it, and you're going to say quadratic or not a quadratic. Okay, so here's your first one. Quadratic or not quadratic? Well done, it is a quadratic. What about this one? Quadratic or not quadratic? I need some sort of theme music. Correct, it is quadratic, because you've got your x squared, you've got an x, and you've got a number. Quadratic or not quadratic? Well, it doesn't look like these two, because it's not set to 0, but it is still a quadratic, because you've got your x squared and some other stuff. Yeah, well done. Still quadratic, because I've got my x squared. No x bit, but it doesn't matter. The x squared is there. No x squared here, so not quadratic, which is just a linear equation. Finally, yeah, there's an x squared, so it is quadratic. Okay, and a little bit more, which are quadratic, and you should all be saying B. So what on earth is the quadratic formula? So here we go, hold on tight. So A, B and C from our quadratic, they are now in this formula. So it looks a little bit crazy. So it's the negative of B plus or minus. Now it's plus or minus because whenever you square root a number, you always get a positive and a negative answer. We would say a positive or a negative root. B squared, so it's just that bit squared. Then you're going to subtract 4 times A times C, and that's all being divided by 2 times A. Now you have to remember this. Okay, so let's get that written down. And every time you're going to do a question on it, you're going to rewrite it. Okay, got to remember this. So here's a little exercise for you to do. All you've got to do is write down A, B and C. So I'm going to put it in. I need you to pause the video now whilst you put in A, B and C. Okay, so there you are, hopefully checking your answers. Notice that the negative, so if I'm looking at this part here, the negative, you need that as your value of C. Okay, this bit here, B, negative 10, so it's negative 10. So I'm going to do this question on the left, and you're going to do the question on the right. So here we go. First step is, when I'm given the equation, I always try and factorise it first. Now I know it's not going to factorise, but I would always be trying to do that first, just because it's faster. So I pick up my A, B and C. So we know that A is 2, B is minus 10, and C is 7. And then I plug that into this scary looking format. So here we go. Apologies for the writing. So it's the negative of B. Now B is already a negative 10, so it's now a negative of a negative. It goes positive. So B squared. Now B squared, I'm going to square this negative 10. Give me 100. And I'm taking away 4 times C. So that's 4 times A times C. That's all over 2A. Now I'm not reaching for a calculator, I'm doing loads of tidying. I go for my calculator right at the end. So we've got 4 times 2 times 7, that's at 8 7s, 56, and that's all over 4. Still not going for my calculator, still doing this all in my head. 100 take away 56, oh gosh, what's that, 44? Now I'll go for my calculator and I'll work that out. And I'm going to work that out to 1 or 2 decimal places. You're normally told in the question. Now whilst we're here, if I was told to leave this in surd form, what I would be doing now is looking to play around with this 44. Okay, we're not going to do that at the moment, that will come a little bit later, but this is why I do so much without a calculator, because it actually is really useful for the surd form. So now I get my calculator, press the buttons, I'm going to work that out. So I've worked out my 2 answers, and when I'm typing this into my calculator, I'm doing it pretty much all in one go, but I'm pressing equals at the key bit. So I've done 10 plus root 44, press equals, then divide by 4, give me one solution. Then I did 10, subtract root 44, press equals, divide by 4 to give me 0.84. Now if you're happy with that, and do it on your calculator, check you're happy with that, you're now going to do this one here. And what I'd like you to do is think about what are you noticing as I'm doing this? Okay, what's going on? So for example, when that B was negative 10, what did you notice what happened over here? Okay, so start thinking about what's going on. So pause the video, you do this question, and hit play to see whether you've got the same answer as me. Okay, so going through this question, you should have picked out that A was 2, B was 10, no, positive 10, and C was 7. Now I rewrite the formula, and I want you to do this every time you do a question on a quadratic equation. Pop everything in. Now what do you start to notice? What's similar between this question and the last question? Notice the only difference with B was that you had a negative. So this value here is the same, but now I have a negative 10 there. Now I'm going to go to my, well no, I'm not going to go to my calculator yet, that would be very naughty. So I work all this out, and I know what this is because I worked it out over here. So your difference now is with this negative 10. So now go to your calculator and you should get these 2 values. Okay, so if you got that right, you're probably ready for a little practice now. But what would be really good for you to write something down in your observations about the order you're doing things, about the effect of a negative on your B, because that's typically where students go wrong. Do some more practice with you, but if you think you don't need the practice, then you could speed through the video and get to some questions which come a little bit later. Now, they are from your textbook. So there you go, there's the questions, and I'll try and make the answers available to you as well. Okay, so you could just freeze the slide there if you want to crack on with those. And obviously there's going to be more and more that's coming your way, but I'm going to go through just a few more questions with you just to make sure that you're happy. It's such an important topic. So I'm going to go through this solution. Again, you might want to watch it, or you could just pause it and do it yourself, but I'm going to do it without talking, okay? Now I'm going to start to work stuff out. Now be careful here, because you're getting a double negative. Okay, so this is going to be positive. It's a classic error. I need to add 49 is 32, that's 81. Now, hopefully you've spotted this is a square number, so I don't need a calculator. Now I could just work that out. Now the fact that I got integers, numbers, means that really this would have factorized, and I broke the rule because I didn't try and factorize it first. Whereas if I'd have tried to factorize it, I would have saved myself all this grief. Okay, so always try and factorize it first. Pause the video, do this one, and then check my solution. So going through the problem, pick off A, B, and C. Write out your formula. Sub it all in. Work some bits and bobs out. Oh look, another square number. Yeah, you guessed it, you're going to get integer solutions. Again, I should have tried to factorize first of all. Oops. Now you can always check these work, of course. So whether they were, whatever these answers, you can always check whether they work in an equation by substituting them back into the original equation. So if I get x is minus 2, if I put it in here, so square it, I do 9 lots of it and add 14, I should get 0. Really good tip for when you're in the exam. So what I think you should do now is probably go, so you can look through some of these if you want to in a minute, but you probably want to do a bit of practice, and so you want to go to that part and do some questions. Okay, so I'll stop the video there and then go to part 2 of the video for some solutions and some the next phase.